A Shalom Akim Shalom Shalom, giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Bashem Yahushai, Bashem Rakakwadash, double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquath that may listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick Lord's Will, as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I just wanted to go through how, something that Solomon said, with much wisdom is much grief, right? So, it's something I thought about in terms of, and I know one of the things that happens when you have wisdom, you tend to, stay by yourself, be by yourself, want to be by ourselves and enjoy within essentially our own company, because you realize you're surrounded with a group of a bunch of people that are just fools, and we're getting a snapshot, with access to the internet. Essentially the prophets get an insight, you know in regards to seeing a lot of the wickedness that a lot of our people actually do, right? So you could think of the internet, as seeing the abominations, within the wall that is the prophet Ezekiel had seen, right? And seeing all the filthy abominations, the things that our people partake in, via this, essentially through the internet, right? So, one of the things that, and it essentially, because you understand, the Lord gave us this understanding to see the way and to get insight in the way things are supposed to be done properly, within the earth. But what happens is, what causes a lot of our stress, what causes a lot of our grief, is the fact that you don't see proper judgment or righteous judgment constantly being executed. So you see, for example, with all these different files that are being found out, a shameful spewing, you don't see the proper judgment that is properly being executed, right? You essentially seeing a justification for the wicked. As a matter of fact, let me get that actually. I didn't have this, but let me get this, and I sincerely pray, that this lesson may be just quick and edifying, right? This is what's that? Proverbs. This is Proverbs chapter 17, verse 15. And it says here, he that justifieth the wicked and condemneth the just, even they both are an abomination to the Lord, right? So this is the vibration that comes from a lot of these people within the society, right? Where they essentially are justifying the odious works, of the people who are ruling, right? Rather than proper righteous judgment being executed. And then when you stand and have a certain sense of moral, I should say, moral uprightness, then you're kind of you're shunned for it. You're being ridiculed for it. You're being mocked for it, and actually having a sense of, an upright attitude and calling things out. And it shows you not just the gross darkness of the people. It shows you, as Yahweh Shai said, this is the condemnation of the world, and men love darkness rather than light because their deeds are evil. And this is what we're actually seeing in real time. So this is one of the things that causes a lot of our grief, because you don't actually see the proper ways being executed, the ways of the Lord. As it says in Isaiah, his ways are higher than our ways, not our his thoughts are higher than our thoughts, to roughly paraphrase. We're seeing this in real time, where a lot of these people don't actually care for the ways of the Heavenly Father, right? Especially Esau, right? He doesn't actually disregard the ways of the Lord. So, this is one of the things that causes a lot of our grief. So what happens is that we tend to be more by ourselves. We sometimes be a bit, you know, what's the word? Not anxious, but snippy. Come off very sharp towards people, because a lot of the conversations that they live, right? And the scriptures say, "Let our conversations be in heaven." But when you listen to their conversations, as a matter of fact, when you go into the word conversation, it refers to a manner of life. Right? As a matter of fact, let me get it for edification. What is it? That is 1 second. At okay, this is conversation in the etymology. It says here, a place where one lives or dwells, a general course of actions or habits or manner of conducting oneself in the world. Behavior, it says life, a way of life, monastic life, frequent use, um, frequent abode in a place. It says to live, dwell, keep company with, to turn about with together. So it goes back to con is with, especially like when you go into Spanish, con is with, and vice, it goes back to visere here. It says in the Latin, it goes back to turn. So with turning, so we're going back, so essentially we're going back to the ancient way of how things were, right? In Jeremiah it says, seek ye the old past, because that's what is really really truly needed, is the proper ways of the Heavenly Father upon the earth. And those ways are ancient ways, those are ancient customs, right? We don't need a bunch of anti, not anti, I'm sorry. You don't need a bunch of Canaanite odious works practices that is constantly being perpetuated, because this is what is not leading to life. It doesn't actually, it leads to death from what we're seeing here. And we're realizing in real time why the Heavenly Father's ways are strongly needed upon the planet Earth, to actually ensure that the planet Earth is actually functioning, families are functioning, children are functioning, women are in order, the men are in order, right? These things are needed, in the way the Lord actually created them to actually be. But this is not what's happening. So this is what causes a lot of our grief. So, sometimes, brothers will be very, very sharp, you know, we're very, very distant. So it makes more sense just to be, by ourselves, right? Let me get this in the Apocrypha, actually. Sometimes people might look at you and they might think, how come, why don't you smile as much? And that's a common question that they say. And it says here, this is Sirach 21 verse 20, and it says here, a fool lifted up his voice with laughter, but a wise man doth scarce smile a little, right? So this is what happens, when you have wisdom, because when you have wisdom, you understand the ways of the Heavenly Father. You understand what is actually properly needed, or in righteousness, of course, why certain things need to be done in a particular way. You understand that, why proper judgment has to be executed, promptly, right? Rather than letting things decay. I'm sorry, not decay. What's the word I'm looking for? Letting things accumulate, right? And that's what, we're having in Babylon the Great. You're having the accumulation of a bunch of, wickedness, that, the proper judgment actually never goes forth, right? I'll read this again. This is Sirach 21 verse 20. It says, a fool lift up his voice with laughter, but as wise man doth scarce smile a little, right? So, people might, they would say certain things, how come, why is he mad at me? Did I say something wrong? right? And a lot of the times when you sometimes you don't even have to say anything to them at all. A lot of the times you're just it's just the aura from around you, the aura, the spirit of Yahweh Bashim Ashai, condemns these people, and they feel judged, I remember one time being on the plantation and I made eye contact with this woman, and I didn't even say anything to her, and she took the hair and then she hid, and I looked at her dead in the eye because eye contact, right? I was making very strong eye contact with her, and then she took the hair, that she was playing with, and she took it and she hid her eyes, with her hair. So, these people really feel condemned because they know in their spirit they're doing things that they shouldn't be doing, right? Let me go here. Something that Jeremiah said. Uh, that's one of the reasons we're vexed, right? And this world is really really the way that these people think is really a false balance, because they always want you to be happy all the time. Like, when you look at the condition of your people, why would you be happy about that? This is Jeremiah 15, verse 15. And it says here a prayer, Jeremiah's prayer and the Most High Yahweh's answer. I'll start at verse 15, but the point's really in 17. And I want to read it in the AMP here. And it says, O Lord, Yahweh, you know and understand. Remember me thoughtfully. Take notice of me. Take vengeance for me on my prosecutors. Do not, in view of your patience, take me away. That for your sake I endure continual rebuke and dishonor, right? So, and that's one of the things that, you know, I believe it was Yahushua that said it. He says a prophet is without honor in his own kin or his own household, to roughly paraphrase, right? They kind of look down on you, just like how they were looking down on Yahushua and saying, "Oh, is this the carpenter's son? Whence did he get all this wisdom?" Right? Because people might notice a transformation, you know, within you, and then you speak in a certain type of eloquence. You speak very uprightly, you speak with authority as well, and they're like, yo, I know this guy. I used to change his diapers. I used to do, I used to know you from when we used to, get ice cream, when we were young. Well, where did you get all this wisdom from, right? And that's Jake just talking a lot of shit, to excuse my French, right? But here it says, verse 16, and it says, your words were found, and I ate them, and your words I became a joy to me and a delight in my heart, for I have been called by your name, O Lord, Yahweh Bashim Shai of hosts. Verse 17, and here's the point. It says, I did not sit with the group of those who celebrate, nor did I rejoice. I sat alone because your powerful hand was upon me, for you had filled me with indignation at their sin. Right? So we're seeing in real time, the distaste, we have for a lot of our people because of this, because when they look at it, their ways are detestable in the eyes of the Lord. Their conversation, their ways of living, is detestable. So that's why you have to remove yourself sometimes from these people, because you just can't entertain them. You just can't entertain that type of conversation. They talk about a filthy, abominable things, nothing to actually, show any kind of care for themselves or their own nation. As the scriptures say, they're wise to do evil, but to do good, they have no knowledge, right? So they're always telling you some kind of folly. And then, you can't execute judgment, so you kind of have to, distance yourself from these people, right? Because it's vexing. As it says in Peter's, Lot was vexed with the filthy, conversations of the wicked. So that's why most of the time, a lot of times, you will feel, to be by yourself, you know, and technically we're not really by ourselves, but I'm just saying that, because Yahushua said, "Allah, I'm with you to the ends of the earth," to roughly paraphrase, right? So we're not really by ourselves, but at the same time, this is some of the reasons, why we would distance ourselves from a lot of these people, right? The scriptures say, go from, as a matter of fact, let me find that. The Proverbs. This is Proverbs 14 and 7. And it says, go from the presence of a foolish man when thou perceivest not in the lips. I'm sorry, when thou perceivest not in lips, in him the lips of knowledge. Right? So, we distance ourselves from a lot of these people because you realize their conversation, their manner of life is absolutely foolish. It doesn't bring forth life. It's not actually edifying. And a lot of the times they're talking about a bunch of things that's just folly. And you see the way they live, and it's like, okay, you realize, like, this person doesn't have any ounce of actual wisdom, to actually offer, right? So, you distance yourselves from a lot of these people, right? So, scriptures say that wisdom is too high for a fool, right? So, and then when you might speak about certain things, and it may not even be going into a very, very a deep spiritual topic, but they're so entrenched in a lot of their wicked behaviors and practices, where you might speak on something and they don't have anything essentially to offer. They don't have anything to add. you know they just want to distance yourself from you, right? So it doesn't, there's no fellowship there, right? Wait, what is it that Paul said? Let me see if I find that. Is it 6 and 17? This is 2 Corinthians 6 and 14, and it says, be not unequally yoked with unbelievers, for what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness, and what communion hath light with darkness, and what concord with Hamashiach Yahushai with Belial, and what part hath believed with an infidel. So there's just certain people that you're just not gonna mix with, right? Yes, we're peaceable among men, right? But at the same time, in the spirit, we're chafed. Is it chafed in the spirit? Exhausted. We're worn out. And we're vexed. We're angry. Because we're in a situation where proper judgment is not being brought forth, right? You see an accumulation of all this wickedness, and you have to kind of just sit and observe it, without without actually being a righteous judge to be able to actually properly execute that judgment, right? So, I kind of just, oh, I didn't actually read what Solomon said. Okay, I'll read that and I'll end off there, because that's really what um, inspired this topic. This is Ecclesiastes 1 verse 17, and it says, um, for I gave my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this is also a vexation of spirit, for much wisdom is much grief, and he that increaseth knowledge increaseth in sorrow, right? So most of the time we're going to be in a spirit, of sorrow, of mourning, because we see this is the condition, of the society that we're living in, right? So, our hope is for, to be changed, and for the Lord to actually rescue us from this, this cesspool of wickedness, right? And to protect us, especially in times of wrath. You think about, the certain things we have to go through in regards to persecution, and, in regards to Jacob's trouble, and so on and so forth, right? So these are heavy, heavy, you're going to be very, very heavy in the spirit, right? So anyways, um, I guess I'll leave the lesson there, but don't use the sorrow to be able to essentially destroy yourself or drink yourself to death, or you know what I'm saying, like, don't destroy yourself, because we were being sorrow, you know um because we'll have moments of certain periods of comfort and so on and so forth, but the most of the time you'll feel more sorrow than joy, right? So anyways, I'll leave the lesson there, but Lord's will, this lesson was edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashem Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.